You mentioned 83 investors for the first bank, and it perfectly ties into what you just said. It was after Allegiant that you made the decision that ultimately led to you going to prison.
Just do it. There's so many people, Raj, who are getting ready to get ready. They either want to jump in to be an entrepreneur and they don't want to, they don't ever do it. Or they're out there in their business and they just won't take that next step.
There's one thing that I wrote a note on that I wanted to get back to. You mentioned 83 investors for the first bank, and it perfectly ties into what you just said. It was a lot harder back then to get access to information, and then of course access to people as well. You couldn't just send an email to 100 people. So how did you go about finding those 83 investors? Was it all word of mouth?
Well, it was a lot of people I'd met. Virtual, I said less than 5 years. I'd been in St. Louis 5 years. So it's people I'd done business with. But I have to tell you a funny story. There was one man who helped me. He was an insurance man, and he was older and didn't have, he was of modest means. So I didn't expect him to invest. But he introduced me to the guy, Dick Gastorf, who was the CEO who grew McBride and Son for 20 some years. And he invested like that in people. So somebody, he said, I've got a young man, we'll call him John Smith. And we went to Hilton Frontenac. And in those days at breakfast, it was bustling. We got the front table. And he said, be there. The guy's going to be there at 7:30. So I got there about 7:20. He had been there before, and we're ready. And so you walk in, and he gets up and he goes, are you John Smith? And I go, very quick, I forgot. He didn't know John Smith. Well, about 8:45, John Smith walked in. And so I had so many of those kind of things. I had one man who was on TV every day then and every day for a lot of years afterwards, who I met with 6 times. And every time he goes, I'm going to give you a check the next time I meet. He never did, which is fine. I don't hold any malice. But what was great was his grandson ended up being in class with one of my sons. And he said, you know, the biggest mistake I ever made was not giving you that check. But it was wonderful. And I think raising capital is such an experience that, and I'm involved with some people right now that I know personally, they're out doing it. And the son calls me all the time and he goes, boy, this is hard on one hand, easy on the other, but it teaches you so much about people, business, and life. And I think that's something that you need. I also think it's a lot easier. You can crowdfund now. There's all kinds of things out there that weren't there 34 years ago. But I think the experience of raising capital is a key component of being a good entrepreneur because it teaches you the value of capital. And it also teaches you communication. Because if you take someone's money and you communicate results, good or bad, consistently, they're going to be with you through thick and thin. And after the first bank, you don't know this. No one really knows this because we didn't speak a lot of it. We were public. We went public on September 29th, 1995. Most companies go public through an offering. Do you know until almost 8 years later, we never sold a share of common to the public? We only did it, and if we did, it was 17 a quarter a share, 17 and a half, and we sold that for 27 and a quarter 7 months later. If we know we were going to sell, we wouldn't have done the offering because obviously, not that we didn't want those people make $10 a share, but it diluted us. The point was, and this is what people don't understand, is we went public with $40,000 of legal fees for SEC filings and SEC costs. Stiefel Nicholas in town, and Pauling Company small, you had to have 2 brokers. That qualifies as the NASDAQ, 2 market makers. And the reason why we had 400 shareholders were all the offerings I'd done. But those 83 people, when I went and raised money for the second bank, it was sold out as soon as I called people. We did that about 5 times. That got us over 400 shareholders. So that's why I tell entrepreneurs, when you go get money, be stingy. And I have a whole talk about that I give anybody you want for free. But be stingy with that capital. But once you get it, if you give them information results, then it just grows like a wildfire. It's unbelievable. And that's what makes this country great, is the flow of capital to entrepreneurs.
Just 2 quick questions now before we wrap it up. You mentioned that it was after Allegiant that you made the decision that ultimately led to you going to prison. Can you expand on what that decision was? Was your back against the wall at the time, and that's why
I was losing millions of dollars a week and month. And I had done a transaction myself and for other people buying debt buying distressed debt. And one of the banks that I own 54% of, that's a key part of this story, had a chance to buy $16 million of real estate debt for 7. And I'd watched the guy do it this way. I had done it in small chunks. And it was hundreds of properties and notes. That was from 3 different banks. And one of the properties and notes, one of the banks had all these notes with a guy who I was in one of the partnerships with, but our loan was performing. But to buy the bad debt, we had to take the good debt. Now, here's what's wrong with that. And I knew it was a crime. In this country, if you own more than 10%, you really can't do business with yourself in a bank. At 54%, forget a banking law, is a federal crime, which I committed. But to get it done, driven by the fear of my failure that I'm going through and the greed of seeing the money at the other end, that's what I did. And then not only that, so that was the first crime because I pleaded guilty to 2. The second part of the crime was the guy in the middle just did nothing. I'd watched him hundreds and hundreds of times successfully do this. And his problems were, he was so overwhelmed. In fact, a man took me to lunch last week that I'd never met before, who'd read the book. And he said, I just wanted to meet you. He goes, the man that you were involved with, a guy called me up, this was years later, after the crime, and said, we have 3 real estate contracts here where you're buying these buildings. And he said, what buildings? I haven't bought a building since like 07. It's like 15. And he said, no, he goes, you signed them and the broker so-and-so. And he was still out committing crimes then. And I long moved on after that, but I did it was wrong. And of course, it takes a long time to blow up in your face. And that's why the little decisions are always important. And it's never worth taking a half inch into the black because you're going to pay. And, it defines me to this day. The good news is I feel like every day I get a little bit more redemption and I have a ton of fun every day. But it was a transaction that I just should not have done.
What's your hole-in-one? That's the way we're ending every single show. Our hole-in-one is just your top tip for someone listening or watching today that they can implement into their life or business to improve their situation.
It's as simple to me. I love logo, mission statements, things like that. Not for the reason why you have them, but I think Nike's the best. Just do it. There's so many people, Raj, who are getting ready to get ready. They either want to jump in to be an entrepreneur and they don't ever do it. Or they're out there in their business and they just won't take that next step. And you have to be willing to fail. Failure, and I had to go through what I had to go through this because I feared failure. And in my mind, I had a failure. And then I figured out it isn't failure, you quit. So you got to take a measured risk, but you've got to do it because so many people, there was a study 30 years ago exactly that came out. It was about octogenarians, which was and probably still is the fastest growing segment of the population because, not that many of them on a percentage basis, but they asked them a series of questions. But the one that just got me was over 80% of them said they would have taken more risk. And you don't get to that next level by not taking risk. And by the way, you've got video here, but for those of you who don't have video, we all think of driving results northeast. But northeast isn't a linear line. It's like this. You're up and you're down and you're up and down. But you get there. You have to take the risk. So just the hole-in-one is just do it.
I appreciate that. And that lines up with a lot of other entrepreneurs and the advice they've given. It seems to be a recurring theme of just do it. Where can listeners or viewers learn more about you, your book, your story?
It's SeanHayes.com, and I like to joke, I spell Sean right, S-H-A-U-N. And I have YouTubes out there that are a lot of snippets about things we didn't cover that I think that people would enjoy just based on experience.
Sean, thank you for your time. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Raj. I really enjoyed it.